So good afternoon, everybody. And since we're the panel that sits between you and lunch, we're going to try to be very efficient in our conversation today around impact investing. I'm delighted to welcome our esteemed panelists today. First, Claudia Cruz, who's Managing Director, Global Responsible Investment and Governance at APG Asset Management. And of course, APG manages over 550 billion euros for Dutch pension plans. And then Rolf Buch, the CEO of Vonovia, Germany's largest residential property company. So the way we have arranged today's conversation is that I've asked Claudia and Rolf to talk a little bit about their companies, their roles there, as it relates to our topic of impact investing. So Claudia, would you like to kick it off?
Yep. Good. Should just get up and yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I thought it was excellent to have our two presenters on climate and climate precede this. We are a very strong supporter of the CRREM, of the Carbon Risk Monitor. What I was asked to do is perhaps to give you a broader perspective than just real estate. So I was told that that would be of interest to you. And that's what I'll be spending a few minutes on. In terms of APG, as we said, we invest over 550 billion worldwide on behalf of Dutch pension funds. Our returns have been very good over the last years, and we are really striving to be a responsible investor. But 75% are managed in-house, which means that we have very large teams of portfolio managers. And I can't really see much, but Patrick Hunters is leading our global real estate and infrastructure team. And we have over 700 investment professionals. My team, the Responsible Investment Governance team, works across all asset classes to help embed the policies that our pension fund clients set within all our assets. And it is our investment belief that good governance and responsible investment are key to our success as a fiduciary manager for pension funds. This means that the way we look at investments, they are in the quadrant of risk, return, costs, and sustainable and responsible. So what does this mean then? We cover a number of aspects, and I've brought some more slides with me in case there are questions, but I don't want to cover all of it. What I would like to focus on, though, is a bit of climate change and also our contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the closest that we get to impact investing, even though we very specifically don't call ourselves an impact investor. Why is that? We are fairly large in nature, therefore we make large investments, and all our investments have to meet our normal risk return requirements. We are led by our clients and their ambitions, which are related to, for example, reductions in carbon footprints, but also to having invested into the Sustainable Development Goals. And you may have seen that ABP, our largest client with 465 billion, on Monday announced its ambition to have a climate-neutral investment portfolio by 2050. That is quite a challenge to implement. But they have also announced their ambition that 20% of their AUM would have to be invested in the Sustainable Development Goals by 2025. And the SDG 7 about 15 billion in clean and affordable energy. We have a large alternative asset practice, and you may have seen that we are expanding that and hiring about 60 professionals just for private markets. And the responsible investment team is involved at every stage of the investment process to ensure that they are invested in line with the responsible investment expectations of our clients. In terms of investing into the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN published those in 2015, so did ABP publish a target of having 58 billion invested by 2020 in these SDGs. It set quite a challenge for us. How can these targets that are targeted at policymakers be translated into the investment context? At the time, PGGM was facing a similar challenge, and we worked together to come up with a definition that has since been adopted by many other institutional investors around the world. It is about investing in solutions that contribute to the SDGs. It is about the products and services of the investments that we make, and they naturally have to meet our normal risk return targets. And coming back to the topic of this panel, we also encourage them to measure the real-world outcomes that they create. APG and PGGM then continued to publish a so-called taxonomy, quite a detailed piece of work that is public if you're interested. And APG then worked with Entis, which is a data science platform based on AI, being able to translate the SDGs into data that allows us across the entire portfolio to identify the contributions that our investments make to the SDGs. In September last year, together with PGGM, we announced our intention to establish the SDI Asset Owner Platform. And that is really open to all institutional investors because we strongly believe that only by collaboration across the market can we really establish standards that make a difference in the real economy, that contribute to the energy transition, and that allow the Sustainable Development Goals to be met. You may also be aware of GRESB, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, which is a collaborative initiative that dates back to 2009. It is the similar principle of collective action to address the industry and not only improve disclosure, but also be able to invest differently. And I think that's what I would like to leave as introductory remarks for how we view our impact contribution to our portfolio.
Thanks, Claudia.
Good.
So how is this? Here. So yes, I will be very short. So welcome also from my side. I would like to show you a little bit about Vonovia. You probably know. So it's this one. So now so Vonovia is actually originally based in Germany. Now we have done some other activities outside Germany. So Austria, which I never should say, but it's very similar, close to Germany because of language. And then, of course, now in Sweden. So we are probably the biggest resi company in the Western world. And we believe in some fundamentals, which I don't want to go in detail. One is that we are actually not a resi company, but we are in business to consumer subscription-based business model based on resi. And the other is what we have shown, I think, in the last year is scales matters. But I think this is not the topic of today. We see actually 4 mega trends, 4 big challenges in Western societies. One is demographic change. The next is social cohesion and immigration and integration of the people who are coming from other parts of the world. Climate change, of course, I think was discussed here. And in some parts, especially in the big cities, because of urbanization, housing shortage. And we are addressing this argument. First of all, I think this is a very specific German element. Not in all countries we have a demographic challenge. In Germany, we have a demographic challenge. This is something which will not go away. It's already done because my generation had not enough children. So this is done. It will happen. In Germany today, we have roughly 700,000 apartments which are suitable for older people. In 2030, we need 3 million. So it is clear that we will not provide society with enough apartments suitable for older people. This is clear that we will put people in nursing houses, not because they need to become in a nursing house, but because we as Germany, we are not ready to provide enough apartments. That's why we take the social responsibility at Vonovia that every apartment we will get back. Every third of it, we will renovate for elderly people. This is, by the way, a good contribution to society, and by the way, for the investors, it also pays off because the waiting list for apartments for elderly people is much longer than for all other apartments. But this is one topic. I think this topic is not enough looked on in the moment in Western societies, and if it is coming on the table, it will be too late. So we should better start now, otherwise we will get big issues. The next one is integration. You know, in the Western European part, we are not seeing only immigration from other European countries. We are also seeing immigration from other parts which are not Europe. So either the people are coming from London because of Brexit, or they're coming from Aleppo because of war. We have to integrate these people in our societies. We are talking a lot about integration in the working place. I don't believe in this concept, because before people are starting to get a work, they are living in our quartiers. So we have to integrate these people in these quartiers. We are doing a lot for this, and we as a landlord feel responsible for integration of the people and the social integration. And of course, there's a lot of things. You know, in Germany, we are splitting garbage in different brackets. So if somebody is coming from Aleppo, it is probably not the easiest, not the most obvious part to explain him that in Germany we are too plastic. Rubbish has to be put in a different bag than something else. So I think we start there, and then it comes really to work together with social institutions to make sure that people are integrated in a quartier. The third one is, of course, climate change. I think the presentation before was about climate change. I think your whole conference was a lot about climate change, so I should not repeat everything. What you have to keep in mind is that buildings, in Germany at least, are responsible for 30% of the CO2 emissions of the whole country, with mainly coming from heating of the buildings and the hot water for the showers. We as Vonovia, we have a clear path to get CO2 neutral in our buildings until 2050. For the next years, I have not an issue, because what I can do today with the modernization will help me to get a modernization rate for 3% of the next years. Later, we will come to buildings where it is today not economical feasible to modernize them because it's too expensive, or the tenants cannot afford the modernization. And then, if we have modernized all our buildings, there will be a remaining part, because we still need probably some fossils to produce heat and warm water. And for this, we have started to do research. I think we don't have the final solution to get this last piece of CO2 away, but we are asking now the scientists of Germany and other countries, but mainly Germany, to work together to find solutions where we can provide and produce energy from renewables in our quartiers. The idea is that we have to build quartiers of living blocks which are completely energetic neutral. Therefore, we are doing experiments with solar panels and heating pumps. We are doing solar panels and H2, so H2 production, and then later use the H2 for heating and electricity production. So we are starting actually to become a research company, which is not normal for a resi company, but we think we have to do it. We have to achieve the CO2 neutrality until 2050, and that's why we feel that it is important to go forward. And I think it's a responsibility of the biggest company in resi company in Germany to do the first steps and not to follow. So that's why we are working on this. And the last one is housing shortage. I think we have to rethink completely how we produce new apartments. Again, here we have enormous social challenges today in the big cities in Germany, but also in Sweden, because rental prices are going up because there's not enough supply to satisfy the demand. We are here, for example, doing model production where we are doing with prefab models, ideally made of wood, which also will help us in the CO2 emission target. So the first prefab building in Germany was built in Bochum, which is our headquarter, and it was completely made out of wood. So I think with this we are advancing also to provide cheaper and faster production with better CO2 emission targets in the next years. And also here we see that we as a big company have a responsibility to find solutions to solve the problems of society. So again, we are changing. A few years ago, we probably would made an investment because return is okay, and we said it should be also aligned with society. I personally, and also my organization, is changing now slightly. We are now saying we should do investments to provide a solution for society, and it also should deliver a return. It's a slight difference, but it is changing. And we know if a company like Vonovia will lose its license to operate, we are dead. So we have to fight for the license to operate. We have to show the society that we are providing solution for society. We are not the problem, we are the solution.
So of course, you all have a wonderful opportunity to ask questions of our panelists, so please start to enter them into the app, and we'll get to Q&A a little bit later. But let's start with a question that really perplexed me as we started to prepare for this panel, and we started to talk about impact investing. And when I think about impact investing, I think about deploying capital to address environmental and social concerns and generating return, of course, and being able to measure the impact that your investments are having. But as we got into the conversation, both of you preferred not to have your organizations identified as impact investors. Why is that? And if that's not what you are, how do you define your style of investing? Claudia, do you want to start?
Yeah, indeed. So I suppose impact investing in many ways still has the connotation of being rather small. And in many cases, also the achievement of social and environmental impact or benefits would perhaps be prioritized over financial returns. However, for us, the primary responsibility that we have as a fiduciary manager for pension funds is to provide affordable pensions. And that is what we always have to keep in mind. Therefore, it has to be both, meeting our risk return requirements while also making the very positive contribution. That we, like you do, focus on investing into solutions, that can really change something in the real economy. The asset owner platform that I just introduced, the intention, currently we can measure how much does a company contribute to the SDGs and how much are we invested in those companies that contribute. And a natural extension of that would be to measure what are the real world outcomes that our investments contribute. And I think we prefer to think of outcomes rather than impact as such. It may sound perhaps a bit semantic, but I think it's really a way that befits large institutional investors.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see that leap from where you are now, kind of evaluating those contributions to the next level? What kind of challenges are you facing to get there?
Very good question. I mean, we see quite a number of initiatives popping up, left, right, and center, you could almost say, trying to, sometimes they are focused on better disclosures, but also about how you can measure impact. And in the introductory words today, I learned that ULI is also going to look at social impact and how that can be measured. And I suppose my very strong recommendation would be to align with existing initiatives. What we don't need is more and more initiatives who try to measure things just in a little bit of a different way. But there should be a unified voice of how investors speak to companies and how companies report, accepting that there will also always be slight nuances in it. But it will have to be a collective effort to define this and define it in a way that is actually workable and doesn't remain at some very abstract and theoretical level.
Yeah, so that is the challenge.
That is the challenge, and it's not a small one, but I think we can get there.
Good, good. Rolf, did you want to comment?
I would like to comment to the last remark. It's a real challenge because we have so many different reporting systems. Mm-hmm. We, as an operating company, for us, it's nearly impossible to apply to all these reporting systems. I think it is very important that we all get together to a more common understanding how we measure it. I think some things can be measured relatively easy with the impact for CO2. I think everybody today has a good reporting system. Measuring something like what we are doing, giving a lifelong right to live for people in our apartments if they are above 70, it's very difficult to measure the impact. Yeah. So I think for some questions we don't have a real answer, but I think we should provide the answer faster than later because otherwise society will give the answer. But I completely agree, we have to come better to common understanding, because it doesn't make sense if we have 7 or 8 different systems how to measure ESG.
It may take time, but it does sound very rational to me to focus on outcome as opposed to merely output. Yeah. So I think that's very commendable. We have a polling question for the audience. Let's get you involved. Can we put up the first polling question, please? And ask you to vote. So let's kind of get a baseline from this question. How much influence do social and environmental factors have in your company current day? Please vote. Let's see what we get. Okay. So, more than 40%. Let's do a show of hands. How many of you are surprised at that? Anybody? Nobody. Okay. How about you guys? Does that seem about right to you in terms of the responses?
I would say a year ago it would look completely different.
Really? Okay, so we're going to get to trends in a little bit. We're going to talk about that. But I think in any question about whether we call it socially responsible investing or ESG investing or impact investing, the tough questions come, I think, right away around returns and impact. We talked a little bit about impact and measurement of impact, and Claudia, you alluded to returns. Let's address that question head on. Do you think that you do at some point end up sacrificing returns for the greater good?
No. That's I could stop here, or, because particularly when we look at our real estate investments, our very strong belief is that only those investments that are sustainable will be those who perform well in the long term. So that is a belief, and that we also see in how we invest. And also to be very clear in terms of the responsible investment policies that our clients set, given their fiduciary duty, the mandate is such that we have to be able to continue to be able to meet risk-return targets in a responsible manner.
Mm-hmm. But do you see in the industry in general that that's an issue, that there are others that may not feel the same as you, other large and small companies that may not be willing at this point yet to sacrifice the return for an investment in society and in the environment?
Yeah, I suppose all large funds are in the same way as we are bound to our fiduciary duty, so wouldn't make such sacrifices. However, there can always be dedicated allocations that have a different mandate, that has perhaps a stronger societal impact. And of course, if you see, I don't know, foundations or other philanthropic investments, they have they can define the terms on which they invest. And of course, you see, and they are financing great initiatives. So there's as such nothing wrong with that. It's a very positive contribution to it overall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rolf?
So I would say if we lose the acceptance of society, there will be no returns left. This is probably very important for us because we are having a product which is very relevant for society. It's housing, it's affordable housing. And if one day the politicians decide that they don't want to have companies like Vonovia, the returns are over. So that's why it is not the question return or responsibility. It is responsibility to get returns.
Right, great. Go ahead, please.
And I think what you see, of course, also that there's a growing body of academic work looking at the relationship, which is very good, and one needs more of it. But I think, given what Mr. Buch just stated, it gets so interlinked, the responsibility and the return, that this separating the two will be increasingly difficult, also for academic research.
Okay. Rolf, you alluded earlier to the fact that you thought maybe the responses from the first polling question would have been different a year ago. So our next polling question is on that topic, is on trends. Can we put the next one up? So over the last 10 years, has your company's interest in social impact investing or responsible investing, whatever you'd like to call it, increased, decreased, or stayed the same? Yeah, no surprise here, right? Over the last 10 years. And I'm sure you're obviously not surprised at that response. Are you surprised at the extent of that? Over 80% are saying that.
No, my guess was 80, so.
Your guess was 80.
Fine.
Okay, so your crystal ball is good. Okay, so that seems very consistent with everything that we're hearing today. Great. Okay, earlier today we heard Kamal Sri Kumar talk about companies that are early adopters and being ahead of the curve. Do you consider that you are, in terms of your own philosophy on responsible investing, that you are ahead of the curve? And do you think people will, obviously the trend is there, but that question was over the last 10 years. So, are we going to see this as a trend that continues and people will translate their considering it to actual action in their portfolio?
So, as I said before, we feel responsibility because we have the size. So we are working in a market where an average housing company in Germany has probably 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 apartments. We, with our 400,000 apartments, we have different opportunities and we have different possibilities. We can employ engineers who are thinking about energetic neutral quartiers. We can employ engineers and architects who are thinking about new construction. So we feel that we have to use the scale effect and the positives which we can get out of the scale to develop new solutions. It is not natural for a resi company in Germany to think about technical solutions. Historically, a resi company in Germany bought buildings and operated the buildings. We feel today that solution, what we can buy from the market is not enough, and that's why we have to develop. So in this sense, and we know if we are not doing it, one day people will ask us why we have not done it. Mm-hmm. So we know that we have to use our power, and this also gives us opportunity to regain or to gain more acceptance in society. There's a big skepticism in Germany about the capital market. In special and specially listed real estate is something which for housing should not exist for at least a part of the people. And I think by showing them that size helps to provide good solution, it's also a good chance for us.
Mm-hmm. Claudia, do you consider yourselves to be kind of early on the curve here and you'll see others following you?
Yeah, so we had our first responsible investment policy in 2008. So we are one of the earlier adopters in this. And it is, of course, also because of the societal responsibility and position that we have in the Netherlands. So you can see that Dutch and Nordic funds are in general considered to be the leaders or the front runners on this. However, and luckily so, you see that many others are catching up. And there was, of course, so many announcements by BlackRock, State Street, etc., to this effect that they'll focus more on it. So there's a definite industry shift.
Mm-hmm. And do you see that geographically focused? So it seems to me, as an American, that Europe is ahead in this regard. Do you agree with that? Do you see it as geographic, that the geographies will actually come to the table one at a time, or how do you view it?
Yeah, there are geographical distinctions, also in terms of the approach one takes. In the US, a lot of it was faith-based initially, and in Europe, it came from, in its very early days, from sort of more ethical stance, and it has been much more about the sort of the integration and the focus on performance. So, but definitely you see Japan being, GPIF being very active, and also other Asian funds. Mm-hmm. Yeah, dedicated to it.
Rolf, you talked about being very kind of centric in Germany with a few other geographies in your portfolio. What are you seeing in the confines of continental Europe?
In a big part of continental Europe, our business model is just not allowed to be operated. For example, France is completely organized with non-profit companies. So, and some markets are not regulated. I personally believe that you need, and I probably don't have only supporters here in this room, I personally believe that for a good rental market, you need a good regulation. So a free, unregulated market will not provide rental markets because a tenant has a motivation to get out of the tenant status, because tenant status does not give him enough security. So for our business model, we need a good regulation. We need a strong tenant protection. And in some parts of this world, this does not exist, and that's why there is no rental market.
And perhaps an interesting perspective could be from a pension fund perspective, that there's much more focus on connecting with beneficiaries, making sure that their voices are heard and that they are captured in investment policies. And ABP has done a lot of that, also to always inform its policy making. But it also means that aligning your investments, at least a part of it, with domestic solutions, so that you can really serve the beneficiaries and the energy transition in the Netherlands, for example. But we see the same in Australia, where CBAS, a fund for the construction sector, very closely aligns with its constituency and in terms of its portfolio focus.
So it'll be interesting to see the overlay of that in how you're actually measuring, and the discussion we were having earlier on outcome measures.
Indeed.
What the beneficiaries have to say about the results.
Yeah, and we conduct an annual survey on it, so it's really about being closely in touch with them.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm sure you do the same, Rolf. I'm sure you survey your residents and get their feedback. I was fascinated, actually, by the materials that I read about your company in terms of creating neighborhoods. Yeah. How do you connect with your residents, beneficiaries?
Actually, we just introduced in the beginning of this year a completely new app, so they can all see everything. They can see now everything. For example, if a light is broken in the staircase, we will put immediately in the app a message that we are going to repair it, so then they don't have to call us anymore. So this is some very practical. But what we see is, and this is probably more important, is we see that a part of our tenants have obviously difficulties to organize their life. And then I think we feel responsible to get them together with social institutions. So we are not a social institution, so we are not Caritas. But we can provide, for example, Caritas a possibility in our quartier to work together with the people by providing them office space and by providing them infrastructure. We also believe that it is very important that in a staircase you have a different mix of people. So I'm just saying the best scenario is that you have in the lower left or lower right apartment an older woman, because she's taking care that the whole staircase is in order. Mm-hmm. And then you can afford some families in the middle and some students in the top. I can tell you a staircase only with students is the end of the building. And this, of course, is, if you, for example, have a staircase with an attacked social climate, it is very easy to integrate a new family coming from Syria. Mm-hmm. So that's why we need to get the staircases intact, and these intact organizations are better to organize integration of other peoples than anybody else. So if we as a company try to do it, it's very complex because it's also very expensive. If the people who are living in one building are organizing themselves, it's much better.
And that is also, that really nicely dovetails with expectations that we have. For example, we have a Spanish residential investment where we really engage them to have a responsible policy towards those tenants who are in arrears with their rents, that they can't just be thrown out on the street. Mm-hmm. So that's also the responsibility that we feel and expect of our investments.
Thank you. As you might imagine, we have quite a few questions, but I have one more because I think you started the answer already, Rolf, when you talked about what's next for your company, that you're a resi company, but you see yourself going to research. What is next? How are you going to take it to the next level?
So I think this is a very specific German phenomenon which we have challenged at the moment. The whole organization of the climate CO2 reduction targets in Germany are done by sectors. So we are actually considered by two sectors. One is electricity and one is heating. As long as we are not allowed, which we are not in the moment, to sync this together, a lot of solutions will not be suitable. So one of my challenge of today, of tomorrow, and probably after or next week is to make sure that the politician understands this and the whole regime will be changed. And I think this is things which we will see until 2050. We will see administrative burdens which has to be overcome to get the solutions right. So I think this is something where we should not think that we know exactly what we have to do in every detail until 2050 to reach our targets. I think we have to test, we have to go sometimes the wrong ways, then we have to correct and go better ways, and we have to question our regulation every day to come to better solutions. So this is probably something which I see in the future. And of course, for us, it will be more important that we are not only a resi company, but we will be an electricity production company, because without producing electricity in our quartiers, we will never get CO2 emission-free quartiers.
So I'd like to ask one final question, and I have one final polling question. So let's go to the polling question first. The last question for the audience is, what's it going to take? What's it going to take to attract more capital to this type of investing? What do you think? Pretty evenly split, right? Pretty evenly split. But more pressure from investors and stakeholders. Do you think that's coming? I think some of our other participants today have kind of gone in that direction too, that it's going to take more pressure from below, coming up from society to say this has to happen.
And it depends on how you define pressure. Pressure can also be the engagement that we as a provider of capital have with our investments to encourage them to act responsibly, but also our communication to the market that we are really looking for more investment opportunities that provide genuine solutions. So through that we can provide, we can allocate better.
Great.
So I think it is very helpful, especially if all stakeholders are aligned. So if investors plus the society plus our employees are saying the same thing, it's very easy for management. It is very difficult for management if your investors are telling you something else in the society.
Right.
And in the moment, I think we see that this is a clear trend for alignment of all stakeholders, which makes our life easier.
So we have one question from the audience. I think we have time for just this one, but I think it's a good one to end on. What recent decision with regard to responsible investing are you the most proud of, and what you talk about the most frequently? Is there one example you could point to?
It's for me?
Both of you.
So I think the decision to give a lifelong living right to our tenants above 70 was a bold decision, because this means actually that we promise them not to increase their rent anymore, which costs also money, so yes. And the other is that we are actively, as I mentioned, actively investing in research, which is something which is not really known in our company. So you will see in the future in our balance sheet a research budget, which is very unusual for resi companies.
Claudia, last word to you.
Yeah, so I suppose ABP's decision of Monday to work towards a net zero carbon investment portfolio by 2050 is a very big one, and having 20% of AUM invested in sustainable development investments. That will keep us entertained and challenged over the next years.
Very ambitious.
Yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists this morning. And,